Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Modern Market. This is our daily show from Monday to Friday at 7 a.m. Eastern Time, 12 p.m. BST, every day of the week, where we discuss all things to do with the modern market. That is the crypto market, the NFT market, and the Blast TGE market. That's not even a real market, but you know exactly what we mean. We're going to get into all of that in just a little bit. But before we do that, just a reminder, friends, that nothing that we say here is financial advice. This modern market is exceptionally risky, so please do proceed with caution and exercise your own judgment. With that out of the way, I'm joined by my legendary co-host, Legendary, today. And we're going to get into everything to do with the markets in just a little bit. But before we get there, Legendary, it's Thursday. It's the 27th of June. It is the day after the Blast TGE. How are you doing? How are you feeling?
GM, doing quite well. Took quite a bit of time yesterday to reflect on the TGE. Obviously have a lot of thoughts on that. Don't want to foreshadow that because it's going to be the main thing of the show. So I'm very excited for the discussion today.
Yeah, me too. Seems like you were in a singing mood just before the show when you were not on mute. Did that? I was just in the other room in terms of the prep. Did you get any words out?
Didn't make it onto the show. I
Didn't make it.
noticed your comment quickly enough so that my singing remains a very, very private exercise and is not part of the intro music.
I see. Okay. I thought we've been waiting for you to go a cappella over the beat. I did think that was going to be coming pretty soon. And maybe reflective of your mood. I think maybe after your reflection, clearly it can't be too bad. People were a little bit unhappy, probably disappointed, and we're going to get into why for the Blast TGE. But if you're in a singing mood, maybe things are not so bad. But things are not so bad anyway. That's maybe a broader perspective if you just zoom out a little bit. But we'll get into all of that and more. Very important discussion to have on a variety of aspects of the Blast airdrop, as well as a couple of other points. So we've got a couple of other bits in the news today, which will be interesting. We've got the first investment fund which tokenizes mineral rights. We're going to touch on that as more of this RWA stuff kind of comes on chain. And Murat Pak returns. I wonder how many people remember this artist who has sold millions and millions and millions of dollars worth of art and then just disappeared. But he's tweeted again, and just wanted to have a little discussion on that to see where we are on that. But that is what we've got lined up for today's show. Let's always, as always, start off with the snapshot, which is pinned up top of the Twitter space. This is where, in written form, you can get the daily update. And if you'd like it, please do give it a like. I would appreciate that. But let's get into it, starting with some price action. We've got Bitcoin down 1% at 60.7K, ETH down 1% at 3.4K, Solana at $136. First headline, as we mentioned, Blast launches at a $2 billion FDV, but rises to as high as around $3 billion pretty quickly. It has dropped back now. I think it's at 2.5. But the broader vision for Blast is that there's going to be a wallet and this kind of on-ramping process too. I saw some people compare that to Base. Maybe we'll make some comparisons and take stock of the broader vision as well in just a moment. Number two, Elements, first investment fund which tokenizes mineral rights, will go live soon. Want to reflect on that in just a little bit. And finally, Murat Pak returns with a padlock tweet after 7 months of silence and millions sold in the last bull run. There's been a bit of discussion on the timeline as to what we make of this artist who arguably extracted a lot of money from the NFT ecosystem. But some people will say, well, he's an artist. He made his money. You bought the art. What is your expectation? We'll get into that in just a little bit. Some price action from around the space. CryptoPunks are at 26.6 ETH. Bored Apes at 9, up 3%. Mutants at 1.5. DGods at 0.8. Captains at 2.9. Azuki's at 3.2, up 6%. Also, Penguins rising as well, up 4% to 9.2 ETH. Mad Lads at 68 Solana, and the Nouns winning bid was at 3 ETH. Legendary, that is the price action. Those are the headlines. Before we get into those other headlines, before we get into the bigger Blast discussion today and a special segment that we're going to have on Blast specifically, what is catching your attention in the market?
Absolutely. If we take a look at the Mintify heat map, it does seem to be a bit of a green day for NFTs. You've mentioned quite a few of them in line with Azuki's. We also saw Elementals moving up They are up a touch more than that, 7.2%. Mutants are up a bit more than 4%. A more significant pump was Cyberkongs. They moved up 22%, now sitting at a 0.55 ETH floor. And as always, when we see the mainstream NFTs, quote unquote, moving up together, that's typically the days where Miladies and Remilios are not moving up or retracing a bit, and that's the case. Again, Miladies down almost 2% and Remilios down 1% over the last 24 hours.
That's so funny. It's not, and as we've noted before, it doesn't happen all the time, but we obviously do this every single day, and we've noticed enough times where the rest of the market is red, Remilios and Miladies just go up. Everything else recovers, and then Miladies and Remilios just cool off at those periods of time. That's funny to see. Any reason, Legendary, why I noticed you're an Azuki holder? Azuki Elementals are up 7%. The Azukis themselves are up 6% too. Any specific knowledge there? What's going on in the Azuki ecosystem?
Not to my knowledge, to be honest. I think also looking at the size of the pump with mutant apes around the 4%, that is still more an aftermath of where Blur is headed in its season 4. And I think we're still in that phase of finding a new equilibrium on a more general note, whether that comes on the one hand to how many farmers will participate in season 4 on Blur. We had Esk with us yesterday, who made the very fair point saying that there's going to be loads of incentives still to be given out and people will want to seize them, maybe with a different risk profile, maybe with a different capital stack. Then we also touched on the fact that the spreads are getting bigger between the floor price and the highest bids. And I feel like we are still in this like uncharted territory of exploring how we like the new Blur incentives for season 4 and how we feel about a market that's not as strongly dominated by Blur farmers as it used to be a couple of months ago.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, one of my key reflections so far is that it's been remarkably strong. I know things have obviously sold off. I know things still are in a downward trend if you were to zoom out a little bit more. But I don't know, my instinct, and the reason I call it instinct is because I definitely don't know how it moves from here. But my instinct is that it is healthier to have this bigger spread. I know that people make the argument that in financial markets it's better to have a tighter spread between the bid and the ask. I just have a feeling that this kind of broader spread is better for this specific type of asset. It forces potential sellers even to be a bit more wary and not just nuke the floor at all points in time. Because if you did nuke the floor, you'd be losing so much value. So it kind of makes you a little bit more cautious as a potential seller. That's one of my lines of thinking. I don't know if you have a thought on that, Legendary.
Yeah, I think I think that for larger holders, which are definitely more significant when it comes to impacting the floor price, that might be true because they would be aware that dumping all of their holdings would dump the floor price by maybe 20, maybe 40, 50%, depending on the collection. And they would realize much less profits or ETH from that. Whereas I think that like for small individual holders, that probably doesn't matter too much. But again, the prices are more often controlled or influenceable by the whale holders.
One question as it relates to NFTs, Legendary, I don't know if this was a question that Raheem asked. I see Raheem in the audience, a big NFT and meme lover, great friend of the show. I can't remember if this was the question he asked me yesterday, but it's been on my mind as well, and we didn't get a chance to touch on it yesterday. A lot of funds have obviously flown into Blast recently. Is there any chance that some of these funds go to NFTs in any way, whether that be on Blast or otherwise? Or if not, where do you see these funds potentially going?
I don't think that this like airdrop moves into JPEGs theory is something that is holding true. Again, on an individual level, there might be people who were thinking, I farmed Blast, I want to take those profits and finally be able, I know I see Shiv in the audience, to finally buy a Pudgy, for example. But I don't think that this will happen at like the great or more systematic level, because for many people this is farming capital and it just moves to the next best opportunity. What we have seen is that Base TVL has increased, and I think it had flipped Blast TVL for for a bit. Definitely people excited about Base somewhere. Definitely a lot of capital interested in Blast Season 2. I've seen more and more of the Telegram ecosystem of Ton being explored, even to the extent that Ansem a couple of days ago was asking who some core people are to follow and learn from when it comes to Telegram. So I'd rather have the hypothesis that it's moving into different farming environments, but not money that is now going to be spent on JPEGs.
Interesting. Okay, so no saviors for JPEGs right now, but arguably, look, it's kind of holding up quite nicely despite some of the liquidity being pulled on the lending and on the bid side. So I think that's kind of bullish, even if prices are down. So let's see where it goes from the NFT perspective. But as we said, we want to get into the bigger Blast discussion straight away, and maybe leading off. I thought it'd be quite important to lead off with some important reflections and strategies. Legendary's definitely got a piece prepared on this, and I have one on the back of it too. So let's get into it. It's been an important one, and this one is a very special one brought to you by a important sponsor for us, Legendary.
Absolutely, let's do it. Let's get into some reflections on the Blast airdrop and on strategies for Season 2, which distribute 700k in rewards per day. And this segment is brought to you by Pump Markets, the ultimate protocol for trading your airdrop points and pre-live tokens. And I've written this post with a couple of reflections, 3 reflections that I had, and then my strategies for Blast Season 2. Reflection number 1 on hypocrites. Criticizing that Blast is a degen chain is one of the most hypocritical things that I've heard from people who, at the same time, are farming meme coins. We are clearly in a meme meta. We are trying to chase the first cat meme that went to more than $1 billion FDV. And having that criticism that Blast is only a chain for degens is not really a valid one, in my opinion, because this currently is the meta. So if anything, catering to that is actually quite an attractive value prop, in my opinion. Second reflection on perspectives. With farming airdrops, and I think we've seen it with Blast very, very strongly, there's always 2 sides. The one side is people like Beast ICO, who has clearly made great content around the Blast airdrop, who has managed to accumulate, I think, at the end of the day, a bit more than 30k gold, and at the same time also build up his ETH stack and like build himself up as a creator, build his personal brand, because he was like truly focused on doing that. And then you have the other side of the story, a thread by Min Dynasty, which went viral yesterday with a bit more than 150k views, where Min admitted that he burned through a lot of capital, and then the Blast airdrop only was able to kind of recover 5% of that. I think in the comments to that, he also explained that Crypto Valley was one of the things where he burned a lot of money. Other people shared that with Fantasy Top, and basically coming in a bit too late, FOMOing at the top, they burned money as well. And I feel like that both those perspectives are like equally important when it comes to airdrop farming. And they also lead me to my third reflection, which is on risk management, because burning through your ETH in speculation of a high FDV airdrop, of a high FDV L2 infrastructure protocol, DeFi protocol, whatever it is a very risky bet. Obviously, that can pay off. In this case, it didn't. So for me, as someone who's like farmed airdrops for quite a while since Uniswap, I was always more in the mindset of wanting to preserve my capital, or ideally even trying to build my stack. And I feel like that Moritz also had a great reflection thread on that he brought up this morning. One of his key points that kind of connects to that was to say that a lot of people didn't, at the end of the day, do the math. They didn't figure out how much they're paying for gold, how much money they are burning, or they were just turning to simpler metrics, such as saying, this protocol has received 2 million in gold, and for that reason, I will farm that, because this is where I think that the most gold is. So definitely doing that math, and also like resisting the temptation to, FOMO in, because the whole timeline is talking about Fantasy Top, or is talking about Crypto Valley, and having like that false sense of security that no matter what you do, the Blast airdrop is going to pay for that either way. It's just not a very feasible strategy in the long run. Now to season 2. What we know about season 2 or phase 2, how Blast is calling it, is the 10 billion Blast tokens have been allocated to phase 2, which will end in June 2025. The split is the same as with Blast phase 1, with 50% of the phase 2 rewards being allocated to points and the other 50% being allocated to gold. If we look at the current FDV of $2.5 billion, that's almost 700K a day. So I think that fading that, from my perspective, would be ignorant, even if L2s seem to be struggling a bit when it comes to valuations. Quite on the contrary, I think that actually opens up a massive opportunity for those who want to farm it and those who want to do it consistently. So the question then really becomes, how do you farm this for a year? And I have 5 thoughts or 5 strategies on that. One is just passive capital lockup. Combine the yields of Blast points, Blast gold, Blast tokens if you have them, with Wasabi or other DeFi protocols, and basically just be very happy with the APY that you farm passively by doing that. It's something that BCheque has been doing, who actively said that he didn't have the time to spend grinding and farming golden oldie dApps as some of the other people. So he was taking a more passive strategy, similar to Loopify, similar to someone else who also did the math, and said they ended up with an implied APY of around 45% for phase 1. So the passive capital lockup is definitely one strategy, how this can be approached. The other one, if you want to farm it actively, I think we need a bit of that perspective shift, a paradigm change from farming to actually using protocols that you enjoy, because realistically, it's already tough to commit to do something for a year, and only 1% or even less than that will be able to mindlessly click buttons for an entire year on a protocol that they just absolutely hate using. Personally, I enjoyed playing Cambria. That's something I can see myself doing and checking in every day or multiple times a week. So focus on the things that are fun and that you enjoy doing definitely increases the chances of making it through the next year. The third strategy is to seize combined opportunities. For example, you have the restaking meta, the restaking trend still going on. ETHFI is concluding its second season this week, then probably moving into season 3. That restaking solution where the ETHFI tokens are also available on Blast. So you can basically just use Blast as a means to farm another airdrop and increase your base APY, but still take a very, very passive position by doing that. And finally, the last strategy is to become a part of a community for shared accountability, whether that's friends that you want to farm with and have a group set up with, have a Discord set up with, or a group chat, or a PFP community, NFT community like the Gold Milios, which have been doing pretty well in terms of staying active. I think just with any other goals, ultimately, it's in life, if you have accountability or shared accountability because you're working with some people towards them, it's probably easier to make it through the entire year.
Love it. So much awesome information there. We're going to dive into that a little bit, but just another shout out again to Pump Markets, the ultimate protocol for trading your airdrop points and pre-live tokens. That segment was brought to you by Pump Markets. Absolutely love it. Really interesting stuff, man. One thing that Jose in the YouTube comments commented, which I think can kick off a bit of a discussion here, is he said this wasn't easy to work out though. And I want to link that to something else, which Char replied to me from Memeland. If you don't know Char is like the operational wizard at Memeland, and he replied something with some pretty crazy numbers. I'm trying to find the exact thing. So I put out my tweet, which we'll go through in a little bit as well. But he replied to me when I was saying, "Oh, you shouldn't have any expectations. Don't be disappointed, etc., etc." He replied saying, "No expectations, no disappointments. Maybe a little surprise though, still." And the reason why, I'm going to share this tweet for the people who are watching in, but I'll read it out for the people who are just listening. Did more than $1 million in volume across buying, bidding, and trading NFTs on Blur just to receive less than $1,000 in season 3 airdrop. My fault. I clearly did not use Blur according to how the team incentivizes its target user base. This is because I'm not a farmer. I love NFTs and respective communities that help me learn how to navigate building Memeland. It's good to see the disincentivized blur season. So hopefully NFTs eventually go back into the hands of collectors. Already bullish for NFTs, probably. Legendary, I've got some thoughts on this, and maybe that will lead into the tweet that I put out as well. But what's your reflection on this idea that, you might not be disappointed, you might not be upset, but you're still surprised? Is that even a differentiation, or is that still just part of the same emotion?
No, I think that's a valid differentiation. And at the end of the day, when I was yesterday, admittedly a bit disappointed in the first minutes or in the first hour or so by the lower than I expected it to be FDV, was reminded of my former boss, ex-McKinsey partner, who was always saying expectation management is the key to happiness in life. So I definitely think there is a difference, and I like how Char worded that. And to Jose's comment, that again reminded me of something that Moritz has been pointing out in his thread, and ICO Beast actually worded quite bluntly in saying that basically with airdrop farming, we had moved to a state where Sybil farming, bot farming paid off the most, and Blast kind of flipped that script and actually rewarded the skillful farming more than mindlessly farming it, and basically concluded that if you lost money on farming Blast, again, very blunt take by ICO based on that, to say that this is just a skill issue. And I think Moritz has made that point in a bit more, in a more nuanced way in his own reflection by saying that a lot of the alpha, quote unquote, alpha content that has been shared on the timeline was very, very general. It was like, this is the protocol that received the most gold, or people were happy to talk about Fantasy Top because they enjoyed it. They were a hero. They are a hero. I'm not saying the Fantasy Top is, again, it's not a bad product. It's quite the opposite. I like it. I think it's quite cool. But you have to be aware where you are with it. Someone like Apex, who's posting day in and day out about Fantasy Top. Apex got in very early in the testing. He's been quite upfront about that. He successfully managed to leverage that position into becoming a hero on Fantasy Top, which is amazing. And he's been so early with that he became a hero. He made money as a hero. He made money by having access to cards super early on. And some people aped in peak FOMO when the whole timeline was full with that and lost money on that. And then Moritz also made the point that, and that's something that I also said a couple of times as well, that some of the best strategies, again, weren't shared on the timeline. You had people like ICO Beast who shared every single play, but then you also had plays that didn't make it onto the timeline until they were a done thing. Something like I think it was the latest kettle drop with watches, where Cyrus did a lot of math on that, Moritz did math on that, I did math on that, and then the drop came and sold out basically in an instant, with Cyrus buying almost $500,000 worth of watches and other people who mathed that, because the opportunity was like rather limited in terms of capital. And it's not that you would have diluted yourself if you shared it. Basically, it would cease to exist for you if someone sniped the watches before you were able to do so. And Moritz concluded that if you don't have like a perfectly curated timeline on X with people who really go deep into those things, then probably 1 hour of your time is better being spent doing your own research than just mindlessly doom scrolling through Blast content on X. So either you curate a great timeline, or you start thinking for yourself when it comes to the farming side of things.
I think that's pretty important. One question we have in the comments, the YouTube comments, Legendary, is how do I find a Blast farming community?
Yeah, that's a great question. If you look at that class photo of people who made it to the Blast airdrop, I think there's 4 or 5 gold millions on them. They've been pretty active. Beast ICO was someone who shared basically every single play that he did. I don't know if he has. I think he has even a Telegram. I don't want to put words into his mouth, but definitely that's a good way to look at things. People like Brett, who came in later into Blast. I think Brett exclusively came in because he saw Fantasy Top and then started to dive into that data and specialized on that, was a good call to look into more specifically. And with some of the bigger creators like Jen, who did like those amazing educational videos, even that is a very, very good starting place, because you will see people in the comments who have additional thoughts, who come over and over to share more insights, etc. So absolutely, that is a, Jen definitely also has a group chat. I think it's for her fantasy top holders on X as well, that is quite active. So starting with the creators where you think that they share things that are valuable or insightful is a good place, and then also looking into those comment sections and looking for more nuggets there and for more pieces of knowledge is definitely also a good thing.
Yeah, I think the gold Milo is actually a shout. The gold Milos they're on my list. I've
I
got
bought
this
one
list of
today.
you got one today. Nice.
Yeah.
And they actually do. I think they're in the. Is it K2? K2 is the founder of. I think it's called. Is it like Underground Free Speech Discord? This is like niche knowledge that I know because I obviously cover this stuff every single day. I think it's the Underground. I might be making this up, but it's K2 on Twitter, and I'm pretty sure they created the gold Milos, and I suspect if you have one of those, you get access to that Discord, I guess. But yeah, I think they're a good shout as like a NFT entry to have a group of people to kind of attack the space with.
K2_NFT is the exact handle, and the Discord is Underground Free Speech.
Yeah, there you go. I wasn't making it up at all. Yeah, interesting stuff. That would be a reasonable place to start. And maybe the final place to go would be this show. I don't know. I'm pretty sure other people have been covering Blast as always, but I think what you have when me and you are going through this stuff are like actual significant participants who are like actually going after stuff. And we share generally the majority of things that we're thinking about. Don't share necessarily every single thing, probably because we just don't want to get wrecked and don't want to wreck other people in case we take excessive risk on certain things. But we are talking through a lot of the stuff that we're doing, and we are doing it in size ourselves. So, we've kind of got skin in the game, and I think that that is reflected in our analysis and the way we discuss the thing. So I would say, as a final point, tune in here for how we go about things. Not necessarily to follow it, but to be a part of the conversation, to be part of an intelligent conversation on it. Legendary, I wanted to maybe fill in a few gaps from my reflections on this because I wrote a tweet as well. I thought your one was excellent and covered off a lot of interesting points, but I had maybe a few separate points that I wanted to make. I put this tweet out earlier today. I said 5 reflections on the Blast 5-figure airdrop. You touched on this part as well. The first one was passive APY on ETH was pretty great. If you did nothing but just lock up the ETH for 6 months, you did well. It might not be as well as you would like in the kind of made up scenario where you just get given truckloads of ETH for doing absolutely nothing. But if you didn't have a warped sense of reality and you just locked up the ETH and did nothing, you would have done pretty nicely. You would have probably outperformed any other thing. So that was the first observation. Number 2, teams can't really win, as if they launch high, then everyone dumps, it's down only. But if they launch low, everyone says it's a failed launch. This was a point that Tyler from Mockaverse made. And I thought, damn, that's so right. If this came out at 10 billion or 8 billion, everyone would just immediately rush to the sell button because they would have thought it was overpriced and would have wanted to dump it. And that would have been bad. And then when you see a down only chart, people would have really criticized it and said, this is terrible. Why is it down only? You can't stop the bleeding. Now everyone's going to have to keep selling because you can't stop the bleeding. Now in the opposite scenario, you have it launching at the lower, more pessimistic range of valuations, and people say, oh, it's too low. It's too low. So I don't really know how teams are supposed to come out. I actually don't mind from a team's perspective. Obviously, I would love for it to have come out higher, but from a team's perspective, I don't mind that it's come out there. And now they've kind of got room to build up. It felt like it got to a point yesterday where people were like, nah, this is too low. This is too low now. This is actually a good thing. They're good product builders here. They're good. They've got a good roadmap. Let's go with it. Who knows? Maybe it makes another bottom, but that's where I felt people got to yesterday. So that was a second observation. The third one, which was a really cool one from Bread, which I hadn't thought about. I've thought about cults in general in the space as well, but I hadn't necessarily thought about it in this context. We've got Bread up with us as well, so I'd love to get his reflections in a second. I said cults are good, and one is clearly forming around Pac-Man and Blast. He said this. He said Base and Blast are leading usage in the L2 landscape because they're the only chains with cult leaders, Jesse and Pac-Man. It's a prerequisite for a growing ecosystem. Bitcoin had Satoshi, Ethereum's got Vitalik, Solana has Toli, Cardano has Charles, Tron has His Excellency, and the BSC chain has the number 4, the one and only. An additional reflection on top of that, not only is the cult kind of forming, but like the people in the cult, you mentioned that family picture, Legendary. I don't know if that's what the Blast team called it, the community picture, the family picture of a bunch of really prominent creators who decided to be like, yeah, do you know what? We want to focus on Blast here. There's something cool and interesting. And I know a lot of people got triggered by the Blast marketing tactics and therefore kind of wanted to miss it because they didn't agree with that. But if someone could point me towards the main content creators for ZK Sync or the main content creators for Arbitrum, or like the people who have taken Optimism on their back. Optimism is maybe a little bit different because I know they run these retroactive grants and do some cooler stuff for creators. But like, there's an army of content creators who decided to be like, yeah, do you know what? We're going to make Blast our personality and we're going to go for this. You've got Jen, you've got Blast, Beast, ICO, you've got Clemente, like pivoting hugely towards Blast, and a bunch of other people who really took on that personality. And it was like, I don't know which other L2 has that kind of distributed community to it. So yes, they've got the main cult figure, but they've got a whole bunch of people who are like, yeah, let's do this. Let's make this our personality, which I find very interesting. The fourth thing, and this was the key point for me, which I actually noted a few weeks ago on the show, flexing gold is absolutely worthless unless you are honest about your ETH and time burned. Airdrops are not free. I find people get hurt when they lose their ETH, but they really do not value their time. I was having this conversation with someone smart the other day, and they said, well, do you know what? Maybe that's okay in this space because people have a lot of free time. And I actually agree with that. If you do have a lot of free time and you're looking to make it in the space, I do think airdrops are one of the best ways to kind of burn your time in order to get some type of financial reward. But for the majority of people, you've got to factor it in. At least you've got to factor it into your calculations, because if you went 12 hours a day on this and managed to make a few $1,000s, like, and you did that for multiple months, that might not be positive EV. I know you got the dollars in the bank account now, but that might not be what you expected, and might be, you know, a worse use of your time than what you could have spent your time doing. And the final point I had was, you do not know what the rules are, so never bet the house on a game you don't understand. Blur farmers got rugged by receiving a lot less than what they expected. The keyword is expected. Have no expectations. Protect your ETH. Earn the points. Have fun. Enjoy yourself. Don't be in a position where you are praying on airdrop day. This is the thing. I think a lot of people got to airdrop day and praying. Like, I hope that this has to come out at this price. If it doesn't, I might be screwed. There's no reason to put yourself in that risk position from my perspective. Be grateful and up in the projected worst case scenario. So when you do project the worst case scenario, ideally you want to be comfy in that worst case scenario as well as any others. Those are my reflections, Legendary. Would love to hear your thoughts. We've got Brett up on stage with us as well. We definitely want to go to him, and Tiro's got his hand raised, so we'll throw to him too. Legendary first.
Yeah, absolutely. Very much liked those reflections, liked in particular Tyler's point of saying that the market is currently in this weird state of wanting to criticize everything. As you said, ZK Sync is that quote unquote overinflated VC monster that was brought upon us. Layer Zero was a complete disappointment. Blast is a disappointment because it's not at $8 billion FDV. But then I think you also have to look at like where the criticism is, you know, kind of coming from. Because I feel like a lot of the people were like criticizing that and saying, look, your Blast gold is only worth $2, etc. Didn't like really even have skin in the game. And making that side commentary. But that was definitely something I noted as well. And I very much liked your point on looking not only at ETH spent, but at time spent, because as you said, you might have not burned a lot of ETH, but if you wasted hundreds and hundreds of hours and you end up with a lower wage and just working a job, then yeah, that was not the most EV positive outcome that could have happened. And definitely don't bring yourself in a position where you end up praying. Moritz, for example, has shared the math on that, saying he made 210K from Blast, 142K airdrop, 70K farming profit, spent about 300 hours farming. That's roughly 700 an hour, and he's okay with that. Not to mention that YOLO Blast still owes him an 80K rake back, which would put him at 290K in profit. I did the math for myself as well. I came out in that like 150-ish hour range of farming. That's not included my time with been writing content about it, which then again also led to other opportunities, right? We have the segment that is sponsored today. I have had a few partnerships coming off Blast as well, but like purely my farming time was around 150 hours. And if I do my hourly rate, get to a very similar number as Moritz did. So I'm quite happy with that, because people are coming at me and saying, why are you flagging this as a W? Because it wasn't free money, you spent time. I was like, yeah, but my hourly rate is insane for that. So it's definitely a win. And I didn't burn through my ETH stack, but it's an important, very, very important metric to keep in mind. Time spent and capital spent on achieving a certain airdrop. So very much like that point.
Yeah, I love it. And I made this, I put that tweet out a while ago where I said, in a few weeks' time, you're going to have a lot of people sharing their gold number, but just, it doesn't mean anything. The gold number doesn't mean anything if you don't share the ETH and the time, and no one on the timeline is sharing those two statistics to accompany it, because that is the full picture ultimately, which you need to be making your calculations for in the end. We actually have Tyler from Mockaverse in the audience. I'll invite you up, Tyler, if you are available to come to give your perspective on this. Would love to hear it. I know you guys are building the Mocha token out as well. Would love to hear from you. Appreciate you might not be able to, but if you are, would love to get you up on stage for your take too. But in the meantime, let's go to Brad. Brad, welcome to the stage, my friend. How are you thinking? Yesterday, you were a bit more reserved, just wanting the token to hit. What have you taken away from our reflections so far, and have you had any of your own?
Yo, dudes. Yeah, so actually, as you guys were going through some of that stuff, I realized why, right? I think where all the consternation is coming from with a lot of this stuff, because I just put a little tweet where, like, everyone thinks day one price is forever price, and I think a lot of the consternation and confusion and mixed feelings come out of this is because people get their money and they go, I don't know how to value this thing, therefore I don't know if I should buy, hold, or sell here. Therefore, I sell and I'm disappointed, right? Or whatever, because they build up a number in their head. Whereas me, like, I see this and I go like, yeah, like, it's not the number I had before this, but like, I've done work to try to calculate like how this thing should be properly valued, and seeing people discuss, people that I respect how to value these things also agree with me on some of these things. And it's like, okay, yeah, it's a buy, it's a hold, it's whatever. I, as Legendary said, came in really late, so I wasn't expecting to like pay for the next 2 years of my life with this thing. So ultimately, I'm pretty happy. And yeah, we rolled into season 2. I actually just thought of something separate that I'm going to try out today to see if I can do some secret farming, passive farming strategy. I'll let you guys know if I hit it.
Yeah, please do. I've got some ones that I need to research as well that I need to just get into. But to your point, I like that additional point. None of us made that point, so grateful that you made it on the actual valuation itself. Like, okay, it is this number, and a lot of people coming out the gate being like, well, I am disappointed at 2 billion. So, well, okay, pretty soon after it was 2.5. And then pretty soon after that, it was 3. These things are like relatively volatile, and it doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to be the price moving forward. So that is an interesting point too. Appreciate that. Tiro, your hand is raised. Welcome to the stage, my friend. What's your take? I know you didn't get pulled into the Blast ecosystem as much as us, but what's your perspective from seeing how people have been on the timeline?
Sure. I watched the timeline, and I watched a lot of people grow in this period where Blast is orchestrated a whole new L2, and they're building, right? They want dApps, they want builders, they want people to build on the protocol so they can show the volume that you're getting the clicks, you're getting the action, that the network and protocol can handle it, so on and so forth. And you see people like Clemente and War Daddy Capital that have created a whole content base of knowledge and putting out great content and building a community that wants to hear about their takes and sees what they're doing. It's good and bad. You see the wins and losses. It's all out there, which is like unheard of. Like you were saying, like people are like, oh, I have so much Blast Gold. I'm like, cool, but like, how long did you take to click those buttons? Like, how long did it take to get your cave game sheep in the whatever, or the carrots in the Cambria? I don't even play this, and I know these things, and it's just like, you got to zoom out and see that there's a there's a community forming on Blast, and that's great. I missed the initial 6 month. Like, I'd love to just throw ETH and make that yield. If I had capital at that time to do that, I would have. I missed that window. Opportunity cost, right? You don't always have liquid. When opportunities arise, you have to make that cost analysis in your mind with your investment strategy. But I don't like that Pac-Man. It was very rushed. The vesting schedule, the allocation, it wasn't in the real investing world that's SEC monitored. You don't do that 24 hours before, put out the allocation or the vesting schedule and like change the percentage of that you're getting for those blur farmers. Can you imagine getting cut in half like an hour before?
Yeah, not great at all. Yeah, I definitely take that point. That definitely.
Can I make a point on that community stuff?
Sorry.
You had mentioned it a little bit, or like earlier, talking about them building on content creators and stuff. Remember, we were praising several airdrops prior to this about them targeting very specific NFT communities like Pudgies or whatever, and saying, "Oh, this is a marketing spend to do the one thing," and that's that's the entire campaign that Blast has been, right? Like, and not isolated to a single NFT community, but just like broadly I think it's broadly the 2021 NFT class of participants. And like, I think, that's a pretty good approach. And again, we were praising people for having that approach, but now it's seen as a degen tactic, right?
Yeah, I mean, I actually think that's unfair though. I think it's unfair that onboarding loads and loads of people to get really bullish and excited.
I totally agree.
Interested in your stuff. Like I'm seeing that as a W for sure. People are invested, people got skin in the game and they care. I don't know which other chain can point towards that group of popular people who are going to go to bat for them on the timeline like every single day. Legendary, I know you wanted to make a point, then we definitely want to throw to Steve, who's got his hand raised. Great to have you with us, Steve. Coming to you in just a second. Legendary.
Yeah, absolutely. Just one more note on the community thing first. I mean, I'm farming multiple airdrops at the same time. I've been farming Layer 0, I've been farming ZK Sync. I will claim Ethify, the second airdrop as well. But I still decided to talk about Blast, right? I wasn't too active in, this is what I did for Layer 0, this is what I did for ZK Sync. Wasn't too active in talking about that. And that is definitely an achievement to have that community. Wanted to touch on Jose's comments in the YouTube channel saying, let's be fair, people are disappointed because the entire CT timeline suggested it was going to be higher. A lot of very smart people were totally wrong, manufactured this and that into B-level with assets or more, but it just didn't work out. The other point people aren't talking about is that the majority, 95%, didn't full-time farm. They are not in the crypto working world, but they are 95% of the timeline. Clemente and Jen smashed it, and WarDaddy, who weren't known as much before Blast. I think with that point, especially with the assumptions that very smart people made and saw gold prices to be way higher, stats saw it at $7 to $8. Personally, not that I'm saying I'm in the very smart camp, but I personally thought it's going to come out at $5 to $6 billion FDV, putting gold in that $4 to $5-ish range. But I think with that picture, it's also important to keep the holistics of it in mind. Also, when you're like going into a new protocol, Deez, for example, is a great example. Well, Deez lost 500-ish ETH on Crypto Valley because he thought it's just gonna go higher. Yeah. And I mean, 500 ETH even for him has to hurt, but it's definitely not the equivalent of what you said in your post of betting his house on it. It's really, really significant to keep that in mind.
Yeah.
And when, I don't know, people like Loopify weren't too active. Loopify said he did like 30 hours and the majority of that was Fantasy Top, but he put in his 200-ish ETH into Blast from day one. You just have to be aware of, where's the person in his investment life cycle? What is his goal with that? Is it someone who is like just has a shit ton of capital and is trying to farm passively a nice APY? Or is it someone who has to go all in because he wants to maximize his profits or to make like gen wealth from that? It's not about Tiro is saying Legendary holds nothing back when he's wearing that Power Clue shirt. And Jose is saying, don't rip me apart. No, but it's not about ripping you apart. I think it's a very, very important comment that you're making. And I think that's like one of the easiest fallacies to fall into is just see on the timeline someone put 1,000 ETH into something and think, oh shit, I need to do this too, without thinking whether these 1,000 ETH, I'm not saying that you did that, that's not the point of that, is like that person's entire stack, or is maybe like 1% of that. And this is like such an important info to assess the bet or the strategy that that specific person was taking.
Yeah, I like it. I like that perspective. Appreciate, as always, Jose in the comments, everyone in the comments kind of cracking us up / providing some interesting questions at the same time. That's the best way to ask questions. Steve, welcome to the stage, my friend. Great to have you up with us in the morning. How are you doing? And what's your contribution here on Blast?
No, I appreciate y'all having me up. For me, like I listen to a lot of these things, and for the majority of people, like I made a decision a long time ago on these sort of airdrops that I consume the content from the content creators to understand the platform and the things that I would like to participate in. And it's funny because a lot of people, I've heard them talk about, well, how much time did you spend? How much money did you spend? And again, everybody's going to be different. I always tell people, though, for the vast majority of people, like Legendary nailed it. I was going to say, there's a lot of people who have millions of dollars in capital to spend on this stuff. And just like you're not going to go out there and blur farm and lose millions of dollars in hopes of getting an airdrop, I listen to the content creators and I participate in the things that I would do anyway. Like, so for me personally, like, just to give an example, like, it's like, even for other airdrops, Pirate Nation, I had a massive airdrop, but I was playing the game when I didn't think there was an airdrop. Nice. I still play the game. And to me, like, that's what this is about. So like on Blast, it's like, I don't know, like I went on Colony because I like to collect. I collected with my kids. I spent $800, $900 on stuff we would have bought anyway collecting. And that contributes to an airdrop. I stake passively, Fantasy Top. Oh, there's a pack going for plus EV. I'm not going to play the game. I don't have time, but I'll grab that pack. I'll sell the pieces. So I think for a lot of people, they sort of overthink it and they want to be, these creators are in different tax brackets than you who are buying watches on Kettle. Like, that's awesome, right? That's great. But I think for a lot of people, they overplay their hand a little bit trying to chase like what the new meta is or what they're seeing in creator. And just because a creator's saying, I'm trying this thing out, doesn't mean you should follow them into it. And so I think we saw that with Crypto Valley, some of the other things. For me, like my thing, if you don't want to have to worry about valuing your time or your money in it, use the protocol for the purpose of it, which is participate in things you would otherwise participate in. And anytime, since I set that sort of principle for myself on these airdrop farming things, generally speaking, I found myself looking at every airdrop as sort of a bonus for doing something I'd want to engage with or do anyway. And I know that sounds really oversimplified, but to me, that's the best way not to worry about how much time and money you're spending on something. It's not going to get you rich, but it's also not going to get you wrecked. So that's kind of been a methodology I've implemented. And I found myself far less stressed about airdrop farming since I did it that way.
Yeah, I love that perspective. And as you said, it very much depends on like what your specific objective is of what you're trying to achieve. But if your objective is to not get wrecked, plus make something at the same time, and also protect your capital and your time, crucially, then yes, you just want to invest your time and effort into things which you would be doing anyway. That's always the most conservative and it's always the most conservative way to go about these things. And so I completely agree with that strategy. Of course, there are more profitable ways to do it, but you are taking on more risk in that process. So definitely agree with that, Steve. Appreciate that perspective. I've got a couple more points, or actually, yeah, a couple more things on that. The gold aspect, you kind of mentioned, Steve, like people were starting to get excited by the gold. I think the fact that it was gold really changed things. You know how people got, this might be like a dumb point. I don't know if this is that dumb, but like everyone's been chasing points so long and people got really bored with points. But if you observe quite carefully, people spoke about gold very differently to the way they spoke about points. Like they just didn't talk. People don't get proud about earning points for these protocols anymore. It just doesn't happen. You don't see people flexing how many points they have on platforms. It's kind of boring. You don't know how many points are worth anything. Now, similarly, we didn't know how much any gold was going to be worth. But for some reason, the fact that it was that digital gold bar really shifted people's perspectives. I don't know why. Maybe it's because I had to go out to do it and you had to earn it. Like you're literally going off into the mine and getting the gold, whereas points just accumulate over time. But that was a real big observation for me. I wonder,
isn't that what the kids are getting into these days? Living traditional lives? Maybe that's what we've been doing. We didn't even realize it. Like we're simulating being gold farmers.
Well, yeah, I think that I think there was a legit thing there. Like people just treated it completely differently as soon as it was gold. It's the same thing. It was tied to a point number with a point value attached to it, but people just felt different. They treated it differently, and they spoke about it differently to other people.
I think even people like Loopify, for example, whose majority of the airdrop was made out from points because he put in a shit ton of ETH. When he spoke about that, he converted his points in his post in the gold equivalent.
That's
like
what I
we
did.
treated gold because people understand gold, but nobody understood points. We treated gold like a token equivalent, like a token proxy almost. And I feel like the whole communication around that did something psychologically. Yes, you said like the protocols get it. It's a very scarce resource. There's the gold numbers obviously were like got bigger over time, but they were like still very, very small compared to like the billions and billions of points. And that created that like scarcity in our minds. We're like, you were proud when you raked home, I don't know, 10, 400, 4,000 gold from a farm. And when you saw another 100 mil points, you were like, meh, what's another 100 million points? But that gold bar, that's worth something. That one I want to have.
Yeah. And to be clear, like 50% of all of the value, talking about value now, 50% of the airdrop was going to points and 50% was going to gold. So there's really no reason to be behaving in that way. Steve, your hand is raised. Would love to get your reflection on this.
Yeah, one more before I run off to my show. I'd say like this is also hits on a really good point that you almost made earlier, where you made the point of like this is a sister point to the point you made about where the creators around Arbitrum or ZK Sync or anything like that, which is what Pac-Man and Blur and Blast did would completely differently than everybody else is they approach it the same way Apple approaches phones, Nike. You don't buy a Nike shoe because it's the best constructed shoe necessarily. You buy it, just do it. Everyone's an athlete. Like all those different things that you think about when you see that swoosh. You don't buy an Apple phone because it's the best technology. In fact, it usually isn't. It's an ecosystem. It's a feel. You know, they had lines around the block and created this demand. And I think the gold is a microcosm of everything they built, from putting a loyalty program on a blockchain, which didn't exist before with gamifications, jackpots, and staking, to calling something gold to create conversations. Every jackpot became a moment in time, became a tentpole moment that the team didn't have to do anything for except for distribute. They made they made heroes out of the people who were building on their blockchain by giving them the gold, and they created it. Like you said, gold is as clever of a name as you can get, but they could have called it pretty much anything. And it just shows that they approach this from a consumer mindset. Like it's not a surprise that Pac-Man got, the Peter Thiel grant and was in YCOM and went to college at MIT, even though he left high school at 17, because the way they think about the blockchain is getting people, it's based on human behavior instead of everybody else here comes and talks about tech specs. When was the last time you went to get an iPhone and you're like, tell me about the processor? It's not the case. It's the commercial about the old man whose wife passed away, and then the kid made a video of the grandma and the grandpa and shows it to him on Christmas, and then you go buy an iPad. So to me, the gold is a microcosm of that whole story of looking at the human behavior. So I got to go do my show. Chris is going to get mad I'm not there, but appreciate y'all having me up this morning and letting me yammer a little bit.
Love it, man. Appreciate your reflections. Always welcome with us, Steve. Thanks so much. Look, we're running out of time, guys. That's about it for the Blast Reflection show. Definitely turned into that show. We did have a couple of other headlines to touch on, but we haven't had time to get into those today. I think it was the right thing to just leave them be and dive deeper into Blast for today. But if you are uncertain of what they were, as always, they're in the snapshot. It's pinned up top for you to read for the rest of the day if you need to catch up. But remember, we do this every single day, Monday to Friday, 7 a.m. Eastern time, 12 p.m. BST. We're live on X. If you don't know, we are also live on video. We're live on X video. We're live on YouTube video, and you can catch us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts if that is the preferred way you consume your media. Legendary, any final reflections before we head out?
Yeah, absolutely. One final point, almost philosophical, on gold. Gold is the trade we chose in NFTs to be the most rare one, the golden pudgy, the golden Bored Ape. And it's kind of weird because we're in this digital era, and yet what we chose to represent value is this very old, millennia old symbol, gold, as a material, and that transpiring even into airdrop farming, whereas Steve said it could have been anything, but we still chose gold. It says a lot about the human mind. It's quite fascinating, actually.
Great conclusion. We're all a bunch of morons. Always chasing gold. That's it. Have a great day, guys. Remember, we'll be back again tomorrow. Take care. Thank you so much for joining us. Keep chasing that gold. Take care and bye-bye.